Welcome to the Trumpet of the Last Ferrar.
I'm Robert Ferrara.
And I'm Joshua Farrar, who is totally, completely not responsible for messing up our footage from last week and therefore making us lose an episode. Definitely.
Uh, well, you just gotta take it. Push this button right here. Oh, you mean this one that says delete?
Ugh.
No, don't push that! Click. Too late.
I mean, what's a giant red button that says don't push for other than to push it? You wouldn't have a giant red button if you didn't want someone to push it.
Well, before the episode began, we were discussing the superior intellects of the educational system of our country and the world.
I can't even hear you say that with a straight face.
They say one of the most positive things that's come out of this COVID thing is the fact that more people are paying attention to what their kids are being taught in school. And a lot of teachers have been fired for their leftist propaganda.
Even better is
One teacher
more parents have taken their kids out of school entirely.
That's true. A lot of parents are homeschooling, right? And the teachers unions and the teachers are screaming. One teacher went so far as to say it is entirely undemocratic for their parents to be taking and getting involved with what is being taught to their children. It is our business. We are superior. We know more than they do. So we should be the ones deciding.
No.
Not an English teacher, were they?
I don't know.
Actually, probably, yeah.
I mean, if they were an English teacher, I would assume they would know the definition of a couple of the words they were throwing out there.
Doubtful. Most English teachers are propagandists for the LGBT.
You're right. Thinking about it, there was
English
a reason why English teachers were the ones that I butted heads with the most. Mostly because they comprehend a remarkably small amount of what they read.
So I found out from one of my college English teachers what English majors are taught in college, and let's just say English is a small portion of what they're actually taught, and propaganda is the rest.
Which would
it's basically just a class.
It would explain our brother
it's
a
basically
huge
just
amount.
Class in, but it's basically just classes in leftist ideology and deconstructionism. If any of the audience doesn't know what deconstructionism is a concept that was created by a Frenchman named Jacques Derrida, and the idea of it is to prove that nothing means anything. All things are subjective.
And if everything's subjective, then nobody's wrong.
And nobody's right.
But
so you can't argue with anyone over anything.
But if nobody's wrong, then that means subjective. The parents get a say in in the education. So they can't be wrong.
Except for the fact they don't believe that.
it's not. It's not
They
an
only believe it when
ideology.
it's
It's a
convenient to
weapon.
them.
Exactly.
The thing
But
about it is, if you notice, the left never struck when it's in their favor.
Could you go back over
But
that?
they,
I had a quick mess up with my speakers.
uh,
if you notice the left, you notice the left is always wanting to deconstruct society and morals when it's in their favor. But when it goes against them, then it has to be rigidly, they have to be rigidly obeyed. And how can you expect anyone who cannot identify what a boy and a girl are to know the definitions of complicated words like democracy?
well, and then they overcomplicate democracy. They don't know what democracy is. They believe democracy is government control. Which, admittedly, democracy doesn't inherently rule out government control.
Now you have a niece that has difficulty a little bit with the concept of what a boy and a girl are.
Yeah, but
She's
she's like
5 years
what,
old.
5? At 5 years old, no
She
kid
basically
really
thinks
understands what the difference between a boy and a girl is.
right. I think she may have a little more of an inkling now that she has a little brother.
I don't know. I don't think he's old enough yet for her to truly see much of a difference.
But all she knows is that boys play with these toys and girls play with these toys.
Which is not a firm understanding of the difference between a boy and a girl.
Well, it's a start. A lot of leftists won't even acknowledge that.
Uh,
And if I recall, when we were kids, we
and
would
she
play
has
with any toys we could get a hold of because we didn't have a lot.
We had
most
plenty
kids are
of
that way,
toys. We
actually.
had all
Yeah.
Actually, we had quite a few toys by the time that Robert came along.
Listen, I was perfectly willing to use the
the,
other guy's toys.
the the older ones, there was a buildup where we went from nothing to more.
And if I also recall correctly, there were a lot of instances where every single thing we owned was packed up, so we made do.
Well, that happened a lot. We did a lot of traveling. Actually, we didn't do that much traveling compared to my dad.
Yeah.
How many schools have y'all been to?
Oof.
Including the same cities or excluding the same cities?
Including the same city.
Eight?
Okay, I was put in between 24 to 36 different schools in the first 12 years.
Yes, but here's another
Wow.
comparison. Um, you didn't have a mother that decided every now and then she'd want to pack up everything you own just because you might possibly move.
True.
In fact, I seem to remember about every 2 years we would pack up everything in the house because she thought we might move. And then it didn't happen, and then we'd eventually unpack everything just for her to decide to pack everything up again.
That did happen a few times, yes. But when you figure the fact that I and my dad were in the same line of business, and my dad took and moved about every 2 years, it's kind of understandable she would think that.
Oh yeah, I'm not blaming her. I'm just I find it entertaining is all.
I've actually been surprised how stable our life has been.
Ah, mine's been
Not
relatively
nearly as
unstable
stable,
since I left.
not nearly as stable as most people in America. Uh,
Probably not. But back onto the subject matter at hand. One of the problems with the fact that college is teaching propaganda to the teachers are teaching propaganda to the students. And now people are starting to discover just how much of an insane weirdos are teaching the kids.
Which they would have already known if they'd bothered listening to their kids.
that's why we need to abolish public schools. Uh,
Well, I'm all for getting rid of government schools.
well, I mean,
The
way back when
they're
they were promoting
it's a
public
socialist
schools,
concept anyway.
the, the argument against it was these are just going to be government indoctrination
Well, that's exactly what they are.
tools.
Well, were they
And
right?
yeah, they hit the nail on the head. They were absolute. Somehow the socialists still managed to persuade the American people to go along with it. No, this isn't going to be indoctrination. We're just going to make sure that everyone has a fair chance by dragging them all down.
Well, America has always been a dichotomy. We teach it's self reliance, but we also teach you got to help the guys down, and they use that latter part against the first part, and got all these socialist programs in place.
They
They
always
meant well.
neglect the little detail that you can't afford to help the guy that's beneath you until you're self reliant.
Well, they're working off the concept if we pool our resources, we can help them. But that works off the concept of redistribution, which is social.
Which, I mean, it was during the early 1900s when public schools were adopted, which was when there was a rise in socialism in the U.S. Just coming off the back of the late 1800s, where there was also a rise in socialism in the U.S.
The concepts just don't doesn't work. It's not a functional system. But not majority of the world has gone to it. But the fact is, it's just laying the groundwork for a dictator,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Ah,
doesn't
but
help
dictators are
any
the
that
ultimate
our government.
democracy.
What was that?
I said, but dictators are the ultimate in democracy. Remember that the government is chosen by the people, and therefore the government is the representative of the people. And in order for the government, if the government has complete control, then by extension, the people have complete control. Never mind the circular logic of the fact that it's the people having complete control over themselves while simultaneously not having control over themselves at all. True libertarians.
Well, that's why your granddad said that the Libertarian Party was just a communist party that was more disguised. They tell the people one thing, but they're actually out for communism.
Well, personally, I am not an anarchist. But anarchy's a better system than what we're running with right now.
Anarchy works for the
Well, I've been
temporary, but
accused.
that's about it.
I have been accused of being an anarchist. But just about anybody who's against big government is accused of being an anarchist.
Yeah.
Actually, no. Typically, they're
There are
accused of
certain
being
th-
being accused of being Nazis these days.
Yeah, but Nazis were socialists. That's what the whole thing is. They were
Yes, they
National Socialists.
Well, that
And the
Yeah,
only
well,
difference
that's
between
what.
them,
and and being an anarchist kind of stopped being a dirty word around the time that people actually started liking being called anarchist, and there was a whole subculture built around calling themselves anarchists despite the fact that those teenagers had no idea what the words meant.
they still don't.
Ironically, they were usually
The
goths too.
Yeah,
majority of anarchists that you run into are actually big government socialists.
or just straight up communists. Yeah, there are ANCAPs out there, but they're not as common.
And they are totally insane to actually believe that turning everything over to corporations will fix all the problems.
Well, no, ANCAPs don't believe in turning everything over to corporations. They believe in getting rid of all government and letting the free market do its work.
That's relying on corporations.
Well, except corporation inherently is a governmental entity. It's a legal entity. So if you get rid of all laws, there is no corporation. It doesn't exist.
I feel like we've had this discussion before.
I've listened to some of the ANCAPs, and every one of them's arguing hand it over to business. And
Well,
business's
then they
whole
are.
purpose is make money.
Yes, it is.
At the expense of
It's
everything
inherently
else.
selfish. And, yes. Which is why I believe in getting rid of the legal designation of corporation. But I don't believe in getting rid of government.
Well, there's certain things the government's needed for. The government is needed for protecting its population and for fighting wars.
As well as judging disputes between individuals. That
Well,
has been a
yeah, when
basic
you're dealing with
function
a
of
secular
government.
nation, yes. But for
Not
Christians,
even with
the church is supposed to do that.
yeah, but
To be
from
fair,
time immemorial,
in most congregations we have
Israelites
been
had
part
judges.
of, I would not trust them to mitigate a dispute.
Neither would I. And that
They're
speaks very
supposed to
poorly
be
of
able
them.
to, though.
I mean, the last person I would ever want involved in a dispute that meant something is Brenda.
Okay. Well, I wouldn't have named names.
No
We
one
know
knows
several
what the
Brendas.
last name I'm referring to. There's at least 3 different Brendas I could be referring to, and I'm not going to give them the courtesy of telling them which one.
But yeah, uh, anybody who's wants the power probably shouldn't have it.
Yeah, that goes for government too, and officers in the military for that matter. If they want to be an officer, they shouldn't be one.
Well, most military officers are politicians,
Yeah.
and most of them have been heavily indoctrinated in the left wing viewpoint. I would
Mild,
actually argue.
mild addendum. Most officers O3 and above.
You're not going to like my next suggestion. Then I honestly think that if they've gone to college, they shouldn't be allowed to be an officer.
I actually don't mind that suggestion, but of the
Well,
officers I have encountered, the ones, the decent ones, the grand majority of them, like 90% of them, were O1s and O2s.
so it's quite
Okay.
fascinating. If you look at corruption in the military, one of the archetypal examples is the Civil War, particularly on the Union side, where there was a ton of corruption in the officerial ranks, and everyone was vying for the top spots. They were utterly incompetent, and they were very good at getting their own people killed. What rooted it out was A, they had an influx of new officers brought in specifically for the war,
And B,
who
they had a
didn't
war
have that
to
political
weed
skill.
out the bad ones.
Exactly. And even then, it took a while.
Mm-hmm. The thing about it is when you take one of the best officers that I ever met in the military was a commander. I started out as an E1 and worked his way all the way up to commander.
Mm-hmm.
Which is impressive.
Well,
I personally,
the best officer I've met,
in my,
that's active duty, mind you, not retired, is a warrant officer.
I can go so far as to say I've never met a officer below flag rank, but above lieutenant commander that
Navy ranks?
didn't seem to have his head on his shoulder. Yes. Well, no, I've met Air Force ranks in that area too, but uh, but still, I know more of Navy than I do anybody else. I was in the Navy,
Yeah.
but that realm. Okay, but before they get to that point in time, they most of them are just still indoctrinated with all the nonsense from college, and really haven't really got their feet on the ground. But in lieutenant commander, they've already taken responsibility and have run some things.
So, from my experience, mind you, this is 20 years of corruption after your experience, or 25 years of corruption after your experience. But there is a sort of grace period after they become an officer where they don't know anything. They're they're fresh out of college. They're indoctrinated. They haven't seen how anything actually works yet, and they are worth absolutely nothing. Then there's this point where, on my ship anyway, they got beaten down by life enough that they became actually worth something as people, somewhere between the '01 and '02 realm. And every single one of those who were worth something to a man quit after their first commission. If they made
Well,
'03, it
like I
was
said,
because they were a politician and they were playing the game. And not a single one of them was worth
okay.
anything, all the way up to captain.
And see that wasn't my experience. My experience, flag officers were politicians. They were worthless. But the full bird and down, and till you got to, but see, they could get to '03 fairly easily and fairly quickly when I was in.
So currently, they're on a timer as soon as they join in, where they are guaranteed to get promoted up to '03 as long as they stay in long enough. I think it's like after 2 years they become an '02. If they stay on for like another 3 years after that, they become an '03. Something like that. I don't remember the specifics. They don't have to do anything to get to '03, so there is no politics games until they're '03. And their first commission ends right around the time they hit '03. So the ones who don't want to play the
Now they
politics game leave at that point.
Yeah. Now, when I was in, yes, it's right. That part was true. But what counted more towards making lieutenant commander or lieutenant, or let's see, what is that in the other branches? I don't remember now. But um, you had to have a good record to be able to
I
take
think
and go up
it's
higher.
I think it's captain in the Army and Air Force.
Captain's a lieutenant.
You see, you got ensign, lieutenant junior grade, lieutenant senior grade. Then you've got lieutenant commander, commander. And
Yeah,
well,
first lieutenant, second
Yes,
lieutenant, captain, lieutenant
and
colonel.
you skipped
okay.
major.
So when you look at it from
Lieutenant colonel is an
Oh yeah,
05.
major, lieutenant colonel, colonel. So yeah, it's second lieutenant, first lieutenant, captain,
okay,
major,
so
lieutenant
a
colonel,
major is the
colonel.
same
So
as
OC is
a lieutenant
captain.
commander.
Okay.
Because as a full lieutenant is the same as a captain in the Army or Air Force. '03. But
By the way, speaking of the
to get a
military and
ship, you
politics,
have
I
to
just
take and play
remembered
the games.
because of the vaccine mandate.
That was a Liana ship.
I think it was. I think it's roughly 20% of the Navy SEALs are facing discharge, equaling roughly $1 billion worth of training.
With the lower
It's either 20 to
standards
40%.
that they're pulling into the military, they'll have a hard time replacing that many SEALs.
Yes, they will.
They talk about the U.S. having the greatest military in the world. But ever since Clinton, they've been doing their best to try to destroy it.
And they're doing a good job.
One exception: Trump did try to rebuild the military to a certain degree, but they didn't listen to him. And the generals and admirals in charge, uh, Obama had gotten rid of all the decent ones, so they were all lefties that were pushing an agenda.
And I think that General Milley should be fired.
I think General Milley should be put in Leavenworth for life
Yeah, if
or
I was
shot
making a
with a
play
firing
on
squad.
Cato. Because Cato was, at the end of every speech was, and I think that Carthage should be destroyed. Which, by the way, and I think
Now, and
Afghanistan should be destroyed.
speaking of freedom and the lack thereof, Canada has taken and gone through and banned, at least in the French provinces, the any protests against the government.
It's time to get out there and protest then now, isn't it?
And Australia has started imitating the Soviets on their dealing with their protesters.
Did anyone say Tiananmen
Which means it's
Square?
They haven't quite gone to that far. They haven't started killing them yet, just beating them down with clubs and spraying them in the face with pepper spray at point blank range and dragging them off and throwing them into cells that you don't hear from them afterward.
Well, the most
And
important
that's just for me.
time to protest is when you're told you're not allowed to.
yeah, yes, it is. And then you get all the good media coverage when as they beat you with the clubs.
Which is what's
Look at those
happening
police
to
officers
the
beating far right extremists. They deserve every bit of it.
yeah. They're accusing. Yeah, that's the way the media is covering it.
Yeah, that's
But
how the media will couch it, and it'll still give support to the protesters.
that's how the media is couching it. And every last one of these protesters are union people from construction industry. Not they're not right wingers. If anything, they're left wingers. They are the very people that the Labor Party claims they represent, and yet the Labor Party is having them attacked and
But still, no matter how much negative coverage the media gives them, they're still going to they're still going to win the propaganda war as long as they're the victims.
I
and they
and
go ahead.
people who doubt it, remember all the footage you've seen of the 1960s marches for equality. Those media were not there to support the marchers. They like to seem to twist it as if they were nowadays, but they were not there to support equality. But everyone knows how the footage
No, the
is used
media came
now.
around on the.
They were losing the propaganda war.
Well, look at the media with the. Look at what happened with the protesters for the anti-war protests. The protesters were a bunch of communists, and the media, when it first started out, was openly stating who they were. But after the tear gas and rubber bullets started flying, and the clubs and the dogs, it won the sympathy of the people.
And then it lost the sympathy of the people. People got
Yes.
because they overstayed their welcome.
Now, in Australia, they decided they were going to punish the construction industry for daring to protest. So they stopped all by government command all construction projects for 2 weeks. No working. And then they were shocked when the protest increased.
It's almost like when
Huh.
someone who's not being allowed to eat because you're taking away a source of revenue has suddenly been given an infinite amount of time on his hands because he's not allowed to work. Find something to do with that time.
Yeah, it's almost like all those college kids who have so much time on their hand, and
They've
so they
they've
decide to go out and protest.
they've completely forgotten the concept of bread and circuses. Keep the people fed
Yeah.
and busy,
Yes, they have.
and they'll leave you alone.
Well, it's supposed to be fed and happy,
Now,
not fed and
Same
busy.
difference.
But
yeah.
Same difference.
Now you take all the bad press Biden's getting the southern border. His choice was to take and make life harder on the border patrol by banning the use of horses. Like it's going to be any better optic for them to be running down these
And four wheelers and dirt
illegal
bikes.
aliens and for on dirt bikes, four wheelers, and jeeps. It's I can just see them now
it's
throw
also
a
not.
rope out over one of those guys, tie it off to a jeep, and drag him back to Mexico.
It's also not very. It's also not very green of them to be banning the horses and making them rely on those gas-powered vehicles.
Yeah. Uh, the reply back Texas was that they're going to use their police are going to continue to use horses to stop the illegal immigration.
Because we're good communist
Horses are one of the best things
environment.
for that. And the thing about it is they can't even keep track of how many people they've turned loose.
Which, by the way, speaking of Texas, there's some interesting developments with Texas. We talked about it a while ago.
Still think
So
that sounds like Triscuit.
it got a. I
Terrible
don't care
name.
if you think it sounds
Terrible
like
name.
Triscuit. It's catchier than you're willing to admit.
It is not catchy.
It's a lot more
Sounds
catchy than
like a
Brexit.
Go
cracker.
on with
Sure.
Texas.
Do what?
Anyway, when it comes to Texas, they had gotten enough signatures on their petition that it was going to go to the legislature, and they were going to vote to enable whether or not to enable the people to vote on it during the next election. A Republican in one of the committees blocked the vote. He then got censured by his district 9-1 for a list of, I think it was 18 different grievances, and he's decided he's not running for re-election. So there's a much higher likelihood that Texas actually could go for a vote in 2022.
The Free State Project in New Hampshire is pushing for a vote on secession in New Hampshire.
But New Hampshire's corrupt. Don't trust them.
Well, if Texas takes and secedes, most experts believe that the entire central part of the United States will with it.
Well, let's be honest. Anyone who can see the writing on the wall of this debt crisis knows they need to get out of the country fast.
All right, flood Mexico. Let's go. They can't stop us all. We have guns just like
Once
they
the
do.
interest surpasses what we can pay in a year, the country is doomed.
Yeah, it's already got there,
Yeah.
and they're still borrowing money.
Yes,
Your
yes.
I don't know
options
why
So,
anybody's
and
lending him any.
they're
your
still trying to borrow their way out of it.
your options are to
It's a
split
Ponzi
up
scheme.
the country or to destroy your lenders to where you don't have anyone to pay back to. Those are your only options once
Which
you're
would be
that deep.
destroying the country. That would be destroying the country. It's primarily owned to American lendings. Yeah,
It
Dad's one
is
of them.
people like
Well, we know which route the Democrats are trying to take.
Dad, something
yeah,
tells
they
me you're
want to
never gonna
take
get that
and
that bond
keep
money.
probably not. Hey, it wasn't my idea to invest in it. That was the retirement company that I've been in.
The G fund.
Um,
Oh, they made a terrible decision. Government bonds have a terrible return.
yeah, but they were considered safe when they were taking and doing it.
They're still considered safe.
They should have just
They're not
just
safe.
nonsense.
Never said they were,
but
but they've been
but
taking a certain amount of my paycheck and throwing into that every month anyway on a retirement package that I'm mandated to sign up for. Jerks.
and the thing about
No
it is
worry.
that okay. So you're one of the people that are in debt to too.
Yeah. So
Uh,
is
but
98% of the military.
I I personally believe that secession is one of the best things for the red state. That gets them out of the debt crisis. They can reform the government, and hopefully go back to the way the government was meant to run in the first place.
Hmm.
But the but at least it's uh, but and let leave the debt with the people who like debt, the Democrat states. Yes, I am pro secession, even though financially speaking, I would it'd be
Shocker.
better off for me if if they didn't secede. Now
Well, I
you've
mean,
got cousins that are in opposition to secession.
then you've got the people who are in opposition to secession because of Social Security, and they've just got to deal with it. Grow a
And
pair. I mean,
we also have a
really,
cousin
you're
that
just
thought
gonna
splitting her tongue like a snake was a good idea. We don't exactly have the greatest crosscut of cousins.
But
Well,
all these people who know that
yeah,
Social Security is a Ponzi scheme and want to
Since I
keep
know
it
none of them is going to
anyway
bother watching this,
are
I
the
can
problem.
say what I want.
well, actually,
Who cares if you
some
do
of the
watch
ones
it?
that I just mentioned might watch it because they're the ones that are directly implicated if Texas secedes. They're in Texas,
That doesn't mean they watch this
and they're
show.
my cousins, and we're talking my cousins.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Who cares if they do watch it? They, if you're
Well,
speaking honestly,
I would tell them to their face that I'm for secession. But
same.
if they thought about it, well, actually, they don't know me that well.
And
But
I would tell our cousins a
if
lot of things to their
if
face
they
that they're
were
not
once
happy about.
um, if they knew me better, they would remember that I've been for secession since I was a kid. Uh, I never did think that the way Washington ran things was the right way. Too, they've gotten too big.
Yeah.
And thing about it is the way to fix it would probably cause a war
Oh, definitely cause a war.
because you
Who
go
cares?
in and you get elected president. You go in and you fire everybody, everybody in the executive. You fire them all. You fire the IRS. You fire all the other alphabet um, uh, agencies, all of them.
Then do the same with the
You take
Then you
legislative.
go through. Can't just do
and
that
think
with the
about it, then you
legislative.
turn.
It has
You
to
can't
prepare its
just do
own
that with
bill.
the legislative.
You should be able to, though.
But after you fire them all, you take and rehire a skeleton crew, nothing more, and strictly vet them to make sure what they are and where they stand, and make sure they have no connections with the parties. They have no ties to any corporations. They and check their past thoroughly to make sure that they don't hold any uh, viewpoints that would be considered political.
Or any ties to any
So
foreign country.
you're talking about
What?
hiring a bunch of
Or any
teenagers straight
ties to any
from high
foreign
school.
country.
Or any ties to any foreign country, and they have to be at least 30 years old.
Then you won't find anyone. No ties
Imagine the
to a
amount of money we'd
corporation.
save. Yep.
While you're at it, cull
Once
the
that.
leadership of the military.
Oh yeah, you fire everybody in the leadership of the military. Everybody in the
And
Pentagon's
rescind
fired.
funding from all public colleges. Well, all colleges, period.
Well,
Public and private.
it, take and not take, give any federal funding to any of the colleges.
Yeah.
You know,
You with this
I was
with the
having.
State Department having been replaced. Okay, there's the State Department's going to be political. You don't have a choice with the State Department.
That's why
Problem
you
is
bring in loyalists.
yeah, you'd bring in loyalists for all of them because you can avoid it. But for the judicial department, it's hard to find loyalists in that area because they're all Democrats. You very rarely run across a lawyer who isn't a rabid leftist.
You know, I was having a
I have just
conversation.
offended several members of my family just now.
I was having a conversation a while back about colleges, and the person involved was warning me against signing up for a private for-profit college. They were saying they have a tendency to be predatory and basically ripping people off for degrees that are worthless. Now, I understand that the person who is telling me this had the best of intentions. But I pointed out to them that I had a tendency of trusting those colleges more than the nonprofit colleges because I personally believe that all a college wants from you is your money anyway, and at least the private for profit colleges were being honest about it.
Well, one thing they specified when I was taking church law is that just because something's classified as a nonprofit doesn't mean it's not for profit.
True.
If you look at the cost of tuition over the last 20 years, and the it is taken and gone almost straight up. It is increased exponentially. They're all for profit.
Yeah, exactly what I said. But at least the private
And when you
for-profit
have
colleges are being honest about it.
Yes, they are.
and when you
They
have
also don't receive government funding.
Was that Robert?
the leaders of the
They also
colleges.
they don't receive government funding, which is a good thing.
Oh, okay.
Now, when you look at the leadership of most colleges, especially the big ones and the state ones, they make more money than the president does. One thing that I think they should do is go through and make it to where no elected politician can receive a salary higher than the average income of the people they represent.
They'll really learn what middle class is.
So have either of you? Well, yeah, you both have been on to the University of Arkansas's campus and other big colleges like that,
Yeah,
right?
it's been years, but yes.
I
University of Arkansas
was
is tiny compared to University of Texas.
I was shocked though when I realized that there's no real differentiation between the city of Fayetteville and the rest of the University of Arkansas. They just bleed one into the other. Whoever's in charge of the University of Arkansas is basically in charge of a small city.
Yeah.
Well, I attended uh, what was at the time West Texas University. It's now Texas A&M Western Branch, and they dwarf the University of Arkansas. But how much influence they had on the town, I have no clue.
Well, I'm not sure when the last time you went to Fayetteville is, but there is basically no difference between Fayetteville and the campus.
Yeah, no, it's just you can't even tell. It's like, oh, you're on the campus right now, but wait a second, it just looks like the rest of the city.
Yeah, they did buy up a lot of land. One thing they got me is with all the heavy tuition that the University of Arkansas charges, and they do charge an arm and a leg for tuition. Uh,
And it's really
their
hard to get good scholarships.
dormitories are dumps.
I've never seen their dorms. I don't know.
I've been in their dorms.
in
They're dumps.
I've actually heard that about a lot of colleges, that their dorms are dumps.
Most college dorms are.
Oh, MacU's actually are pretty nice.
That's the perks of a private school.
Now the uh, Ecclesia,
Which, by the way,
they,
I advise
their dorms are basically houses.
if anyone watching is almost college age or plans on going to college, if at all possible, do not live in the dorms. I know they talk about how your grades are higher when you live in the dorms, but you know what also is higher when you live in the dorms? Depression rates. Stay off campus if you can.
Most colleges require freshmen to stay on.
I only went to private colleges, and both the private colleges I went to required anyone whose family didn't live in the area or was below the age of 22 to stay on campus.
Now, West Texas State didn't require us to stay on campus if we weren't freshmen. Mid America did require us to stay on campus pretty much no matter what. That was a private college.
Yeah, but we know Mid America's
International
changed.
Seminary. Yeah,
Yeah,
International
I just told you.
Seminary.
Because
Uh, Nobody stayed on campus, though they did have a campus, but nobody stayed on campus.
uh,
Because
like I said, if at all possible, dorm life. Dorm life is toxic life. Don't live it. Avoid it at all costs.
Well, if you
a
join the
lot of
military, you don't have a choice.
Well,
the
yeah.
protests and hostilities in Europe will either ratchet up or tone down now that the election is coming.
Well, I mean, there's still several high-profile elections that are, well, at least one high-profile election that's still coming through the pipe in Europe, and Macron's not having a great time.
Now, in, one thing that's been pointing it out is that since Biden has been in office, China's been doing great because Biden has set
Just
down an order that by 2050, all government vehicles, in fact, he wants the entire country on electric vehicles. And
just never mind,
who
the
makes
financial
the
crisis that China's
yeah but see, Biden's doing his best to bail them out of that though, because if everybody's in electric vehicles and they're the only ones making the batteries, is China can't help but come out on top.
Yet
They just
it's if they
ensured that
crumble before that point, if
they
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 can't
just
make it to
made
that
sure
point, then
that the lithium mines in Afghanistan are now in Chinese control because they didn't negotiate with the Afghani government to get it into our hands.
See, they're kind of putting the cart before the horse because they're forgetting that if they keep ratcheting up our inflation, no one's going to be able to afford the electric cars.
who can afford electric cars anyway? They're super expensive.
I certainly can't afford an electric car.
They're trying. It seems like they're trying to push it until the people snap and actually it comes to a conflict, and they believe that they can put down the peasants so that they can get more control.
Well, if you like today's episode and you don't like control, feel free to hit the like button, subscribe, and hear more anti-control rhetoric next time.
If you really don't like control, I am sure there are other hotkeys you can use, but you're probably stuck out of luck.
Or you could shift to another.
Oh, you can set it up where other things are hot.
Also, Control Shift Escape is a lot faster and more convenient than Control Alt Delete, but Control Alt Delete will get you out of more circumstances.
But if you're using Windows 98 or older, probably I think actually Windows XP or older, just stick with Control Alt Delete.
If you're in Linux, it's control busier backwards.
Also, Control Z is undo, Control X is cut, Control C is copy, and Control V is paste.